Please be advised that the information presented herein is for educational purposes only. It is strongly recommended that listeners should seek guidance from qualified paid professionals of their choosing before acting upon any information or materials discussed. Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Real Estate News Unpacked. I'm your co-host Marcel, your mortgage money guy, alongside Ronald, your 5-star Michelin multiplex design, all things design multiplex. We've got another awesome week of a lot of information to share this week. Ronald, anything you got to unpack before I deliver?
No, this is going to be an exciting recording. I simply think that there's just such great articles this week in the news. So I'm ready to jump right in and get these things unpacked.
On this edition, we've got a few topics to cover. Is productivity returning to Canada? We're going to look at that. We're going to look at the top 5 least expensive neighborhoods in the GTA. Home ownership. Is home ownership becoming more of a thing in Canada? Are housing prices falling? We're going to look at CMHC and its quiet revolution, what's happening there. And last but not least, the elevated supply as a result in the rental market. So this is as a result of the overbuilding of rentals. What's happening there? So let's jump into our first article, Ron.
This article here, it says returning to the office is not the answer to Canada's productivity problem, right? And it will add pressure to urban housing. That's no mistake. Urban housing as it stands today is certainly a problem. We're in the middle of a crisis. We're in the middle of a crisis. Do we need more people coming back to our cities to work? And I think also there's a big question mark here is like, well, the whole drive to bring people back into these major centers is to increase productivity. Well, is productivity a byproduct of people moving closer to their jobs? Right. And this is obviously the question that I think most people will have. And I might be leaning more on the other side of that. And I may say, you know what, there is definitely a factor here where it is productivity is certainly necessary, but it may not be necessarily a byproduct. And I'll show some examples. But why don't we jump a little more into some of the other articles that follow, or parts of that article. So here you can see highlighted, it says like the absence of working together has hurt innovation and productivity. Marcel,
Yeah.
you're a big guy. I know you actually you prefer like people like in the same space. Like what's
Yeah.
your take on this?
Yeah, there's no replacement for, and I always say this with my team, there's no replacement in competing against a team that eats and basically stays together, right? There's no replacement for that. You will, like, if you had two teams, one team is eating together in person and the other team is, running around in their PJs on Zoom. There's no comparison. The team that eats together will blow the other team away. It's not to say that I'm opposed to the hybrid option. Hybrid is totally fine. But that in person creates connectivity. And the more connected a team is, especially amongst the co-founders and the top executives, the more battle ready they will be for the economy of the future, and today's economy, to be quite frank. So, that's my position on that. I draw the line in the sand about Zoom and PJs.
Yeah.
Like you're not gonna win. You're not gonna win against the companies that figure out a viable hybrid solution.
Oh, that's, it's great that you said this because, and this is kind of maybe slightly off topic here, but, they say basically necessity breeds innovation, right? So because now we're away from the office, we had to innovate because employers are realizing like it's actually costly. It is costly to actually have people just simply working outside of the office. And what was the innovation that came out of that? A huge push towards AI, right? Which is now potentially, right? Maybe some may question, but there is a huge push towards AI, which is potentially increasing productivity, right? So I certainly think like there is a place for this sort of comment. So some may differ, right? I think most organizations during the pandemic really moved into obviously a work from home type of productivity model, but now we're seeing a lot of companies really starting to push. And here it says basically one of the main things that we're seeing, and I've heard this throughout industries, and that people are making the comment that it's harder to share ideas and work together when you're working remotely. And I think it goes without saying. And if you read this even further, you can see that there's a lot of studies and a lot of research that are actually showing. And you see here, they say another study with 45,000 knowledge workers. So knowledge workers, I know you made a really great point about the like knowledge workers, and I believe you classify the other group of workers as what's the term that you used?
Essential.
Essential workers. So there's a huge difference here between the two, and whether this actually whether this is actually a real factor. Now, forward here is like, this is a really interesting, and I think this is kind of going to drive a lot of the conversation throughout this whole recording, right? Where people lives matters more, right?
Yeah.
And then I highlighted what I think is an important little note here is like, but when housing costs are high and commutes are long, productivity drops, especially for lower income workers,
Yeah.
right? This is
100%. From my perspective, you look at this. Case in point would be, someone who's an essential worker, like maybe like a nurse or a teacher, right? So in Toronto, we've got some of the best healthcare corridors located right downtown, right on University, and if you think about where the essential workers that fuel these hospitals are traveling from, right? They're likely not in the surrounding areas, living in the surrounding areas, right? They're likely traveling in from various parts of the GTA. So this is something that has to be thought of, and this is kind of why it matters. Kind of coming back to multiplexes is creating that housing, in the city where these essential workers can live, is absolutely important, because if they have to commute 2 hours to their job, which is already, the job is already stressful, it's taxing on them. Then they have to commute back. They've got the household, they got kids, the family matters, all of that. There's your productivity, right? Like the person arrives to work and they're tired, right? Because they've just come from a 2 hour travel. So this is essential. This is where cities need to step up. I always say, if cities just did what they need to do, which is focus on the infrastructure, get transit going, get that infrastructure built and up to spec, the entrepreneurs will follow. The small developers, the larger developers will follow with the product, once the cities are connected. So yeah, that's the importance, and why this matters, right? Especially for when you get into that category of essential workers.
That is actually such a good point. You actually got me thinking, right, Marcel? You actually got me thinking as you made that comment there. And what I'm thinking of here is they may be onto something here, right? As far as the essential workers go, and as far as and creating productivity, and maybe I'll use this as an analogy or maybe an example of a microcosm. So when you think about like farm, and we actually talked about this on a previous podcast where you showed a chart of how farming is extremely productive compared to other industries, and
Construction specifically. Yeah.
no, not construction. I say yeah, particularly yes. In terms of they're diametrically opposed in terms of productivity.
They're opposite
Different ends of the
spectrum.
spectrum, right? Yeah, it's huge. Like basically, productivity in construction is negative. Productivity, which is essential, right? And during the pandemic, construction workers were considered essential workers, right? Of course, like farming as well. Farming, which is on the other side, which has like a huge productivity. In fact, we produce so much that we're able to ship. In fact, I've seen some reports where they're dumping a lot of like stuff that's just is just too much to ship out. But or we're unable to use. But the reason why I wanted to just kind of and I'm thinking about this is, let's look at farming as a microcosm of this bigger economy, right? Productivity. When you think about farmers, farmers actually, and as I say, food producers, they usually have like they set up these hubs of productivity where it is the workers, these workers are actually housed very close to their place of work, right? In fact, sometimes their meals are prepared even, right? And of course they're getting their pay and so forth. And not that I'm saying this is something that's replicatable in an urban environment, but it seems that, you know, this is somehow adding to the productivity. Now, make no mistake, the mechanized nature of farming actually makes it more productive, right? You aren't using like manual tools, you're using a lot of machinery. But when it comes to picking and so forth, sometimes it's very manual and labor. So I'm thinking now, as you mentioned, that is like, you know what if we actually did provide missing middle housing, right? Very close to a lot of these essential workers' workplaces, right? Like if there was the ability to do that at scale, there maybe really be onto something. There might be a real solution here that can add that level of productivity that we're looking for, right? There might be a real solution there, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that essentially is the missing middle movement, right? And the
Yeah.
scale is every single individual doing one or two, right? Right? If you've got an army of small developers and they're all doing, 2 to 3 deals a year, there's your scale, right? And the speed is there as well. So that's the whole idea. The volume and the execution of the missing middle scale is so much quicker than a large high rise. You can turn this stuff in, months. You had a basement apartment in months, right? That's there's a unit added, right? Versus high rise. So, anyways, I think this is good. I think we've hit the point here. Um, you know, it does matter
It
where
does
people
matter.
live.
It absolutely does matter.
And the long commutes, it goes back to jobs and transportation, right? Like it goes back to those two key things that cities really need to pay attention to and constantly evolve.
Well, that's really interesting because so this got me thinking here on my kind of my final point here, and I thought there was a great sort of article about it. But within that article, they had this chart, and of course, I think there's many charts like this, and probably many of our listeners might be able to point to other communities across Ontario that have similar price points. But I thought this to be interesting because not too long ago, a lot of the neighborhoods here on this list actually had price points that were above $1 million, like really towing the line of $1 million. So you can see here Brampton, North York, Mississauga, Burlington, Vaughan. Like these are very expensive markets right here in the GTA, right? And one of the things like I looked at there, the price points are like very close to $500,000 for these type of homes. Now, whether these homes are starter homes or these are like kind of larger family homes, at the end of the day, what I really found interesting here, Marcel, and I know you're going to elaborate on this as we move into some additional articles that you are presenting. But one of the things that I think really interesting here is that there's a lot of talk right now that the rental market is supercharged. Like rents are great and people are renting. Having rental property now, especially if it's stabilized, is a great asset to have. Now, with that said, I look at these neighborhoods and see these prices really decreasing and getting into the neighborhood of being more approachable or more reasonable, where it is more people can now really start balancing. Does it make sense to pay a rent on a property, or to actually move into home ownership at these prices, right? Is this something that you think you'll start seeing more of? Are we going to see the pendulum shift here?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the pendulum always swings, right?
Yeah.
That's why it's a pendulum. Right now it's swinging more towards rental, and we'll talk about that in the articles up and coming. I will caution with some of those neighborhoods because I'm quite familiar with a number of them, Flemington Park and such. That the statistics, I'm not exactly too sure what type of housing that is, but there is types of co-op housing and that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, that is available in those neighborhoods that may be artificially bringing down that price point. And those are typically housing types of housing that you can buy. They trade on the market. Sometimes they can be a little bit more difficult to finance,
Mhm.
interestingly enough. Um, but they typically don't really appreciate in value much, right? They pretty much stay consistent. There are parts of Toronto where you can buy a property for 400, 450,000, and you're kind of going like, what the heck? But that property won't appreciate much just based on the location and the type of housing it is. So we do have to caution on that note.
That's
On
really
the
good.
other note, to
Mhm.
your point, I think we're a little bit early for for the pendulum swinging back just yet. It will eventually, but as prices kind of come down, that's what you'll start to see. I think there's a lot of homeowners on the sidelines still. They still got the kind of the Trump whiplash, so to speak, right? That they're trying to ease off. Um, they will sit there for a bit until things become more certain and a little bit more stabilized, and then they'll get back into the market. And I think the smart ones are jumping into the market now and realizing the opportunity, but the majority won't do that, right? So for now, it's game on, it's rental, it's build, build, build. That's the game right now, and that's where that's where you want to be if you're a developer, builder,
Yeah,
lender
exactly.
in this type of market. Yeah.
So I really like that. And to your point, basically make no mistake, investors and homeowners are the ones that are driving development. Right? Even developers need people to actually buy the product, or else it's not going to be a product, right? It's going to be a failing product. And with that said, I can see, given the fact that prices are coming down, and whether that's as a result of construction costs coming down, which I think is not the case, is that there's just a bit more, if you want to say, money being funneled into the market with regards to building new rental stock, right? So there's a huge push on that front. And and of course, maybe there's a little bit of productivity coming into the marketplace as well, right? With regards to industrializing the new builds and so forth. So with that said, I actually see developers that are really thinking towards the future is that, if prices continue to come down in this way, providing supply to the potential market that will be waiting for these starter homes, is going to be very important. And if you follow the money or the rebates, right, from federal government, GST, rebates and so forth, you can see how home buyers are basically piling up right now. Everyone is piling up against the fences, right? And it's like, okay, so as soon as that gate opens,
Yeah.
it's going to be a rush, right?
Yeah, no. And the only thing I would say, I think you're right, Ron. The only thing I would say is there are very few developers that can cash flow that and wait if the starting point is not correct, right?
Okay, got
So,
you, got you.
if you can't cash flow that and sit around and wait, like you can't go and build your houses and wait till they come. They will come. They'll come back. But it's how long can you wait
Oh,
until they come
look.
back,
Well,
right? So that
you're the money guy. If guys are like they cannot wait. This is a business, and like, yeah, it's a
yeah,
failing business if you just have
this is a
product.
business where it's all predicated on time, right?
Time,
Your
yes.
returns, your costs, human deal fatigue. It's all predicated on time. How fast can you get in? How fast can you get out? Right? Um, like that's all that matters,
That's
right?
great stuff, man. That's really good
So
stuff. Awesome. So, look, let's jump into the next topic here. I know you got a lot to share here, Marcel. So, why don't we get into it?
yeah, yeah. So affordability, this is kind of really related to the stuff that you're talking about, Ron, where you saw home prices kind of really in the least expensive neighborhoods in the GTA. But what I want to caution with this, maybe just go back to that headline is it's a headline. And one of the things we want to do here in Unpacked is really kind of decipher the headlines, right? So home ownership costs in Canada fall to, most affordable levels in 3 years. Um, and then the fine print says RBC says interest rate cuts are helping, but many markets remain out of reach. Right. So what is it? Right. So this is the reason I pulled this up is really just for headline caution, right? Be careful you don't become a headline reader, a headline investor, a headline developer. You may miss the point, right?
You gotta
Headlines are
dive
meant to
deeper.
drive news. You got to dig deeper. You got to peel the onion, and that's why we are here to help unpack what is really happening. So, what's really happening, if you go to the next slide, is and we talked about this in the CMHC report when we went through the affordability rates. The national affordability measure. Ron, can you buy a house nationally?
Yeah, nationally, I think people are generally buying. No one is saying like I'm gonna buy a house in Canada. They're saying I'm gonna buy a
Right.
house in a neighborhood somewhere very
Right. There's
specific.
no such thing as a national market, right?
Yeah.
So once again, be careful with these stats, right? They're almost kind of meaningless. Go back and pull that up. I'll just read it. So they say so it says Canada's national affordability measure has dropped to 55%, down from 60 a year ago. So the headline was basically meaningless. So it talks about Canada's national affordability. Sure, it's down 5%. What does that really mean? If Toronto and Vancouver move a couple beeps, there's your 5%, right? Because of the size of the markets. But really, what that means is, nothing's really changed, right? We looked at the stats from the CMHC report,
Yeah.
and Toronto and Vancouver way out of whack. They need to bring things back in line for 2035, so the next 10 years. And I think, Vancouver's measure was around 77% or so, and Toronto's was around 59. So still, you know, way out of whack, but it looks a little bit better. I think in the report, whenever they kind of earmarked that stat, I think Vancouver's was 99, now it's 92 or whatever, right?
But man,
So this is the problem with headlines, and the whole idea of that article is just be cautious on the headlines. Like, they're, in many cases, they can be meaningless. They're just meant to drive an agenda.
well, I really like that, and I want to just kind of maybe kind of expanding even on that point that you're making. Like, look, we just talked about how home prices are really becoming inexpensive, right? It's becoming inexpensive in certain neighborhoods, short Ontario, but now we're looking at basically ratios of income, household income to home ownership cost and so forth. And we're looking at these numbers and we're saying, well, this is not really reflective. So how much more inexpensive do these houses need to come down to make these numbers that are showing up on these graphs look more appealing to people,
Yeah. So it's
right?
it's not just about house prices falling. It's about income as well, right?
Exactly.
And
Income
right now,
rising. Yeah.
yeah, it's about income rising. So
And what's the
there's
number
that
one factor, Marcel, of
there's
income
that in
rising? What's the number
there's
one
that
factor?
what's that?
What's the number one factor for income rising?
The
Right?
number one factor for income rising. Where are you going with this? The
Productivity.
jobs?
Productivity,
Oh,
right?
productivity.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
sure.
like, yeah, productivity is like, without productivity, you just simply
Yeah,
don't
gross
have
gross output. Yeah, exactly.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the next article. CMHC is quietly becoming a rental housing powerhouse. Really good article here. That really caught my eye. I know it's caught the eye of a number of these developer investor groups that I'm a part of, and really what this is about. Written by Daniel Foch. Really really well done. And really what this is about is, for decades, CMHC has always been like that invisible hand, they say, helping Canadians buy home. And as of recent, their recent 2024 annual report, what's actually showing is, Canada could become more and more like its European counterparts, who, have, for decades seen declining home ownership. and more institutional rental housing. And really, this is a story on following the money, right? So where is the money going? That's what we're going to uncover in this story. Okay, so the next slide is super interesting. So this is the housing tenure distribution. So the share of households in different tenure types in percentiles, 2022 or the latest year. So basically, what this shows is to the left, those are the nations that are more steeped in ownership. So the blue, dark blue, light blue is more ownership, and the dark green and light green is more rent. Dark green is private, so you can see places like Germany, heavy institutional private rent, and then the light green is subsidized rent. So Canada sits right, kind of almost smack in the middle, alongside the UK, the United States. I've pointed out there as well. Slightly less ownership, heavily mortgaged, right? And lots of private rent as well. So the point being is, if we continue on this kind of projected, flow of money, Canada will start to move more towards our European counterparts on the right hand of the graph, where we'd see less and less ownership and more private, likely more private rent in this case, and some subsidized. So super interesting, factors, lots to unpack on this. But I don't know if you have any comments on this, Ron.
Yeah.
I think
This is actually
this is super
quite,
interesting here.
yeah, this is like super interesting. I like the fact that Canada sits in the middle. This is super balanced. This is where people like to say Canada is a balanced market. They like to compact their money right here for many reasons, more than one. It's stable in many other reasons, for many other reasons.
Yeah.
One of the
Now,
things that,
now recognize,
yeah,
though, Ron, like sitting in the middle
yeah,
where we are as on in relation to this graph doesn't mean that's the middle of rent and ownership, right? We're still up, the 70 percentile ownership. So
yeah.
70% is ownership, and mortgage is heavily mortgaged. You can see how heavily mortgaged we are. So we're still higher on that ownership percentile, right?
And so this is actually quite interesting. And one of the things like I want to kind of point out here is, as a missing middle expert, someone that does a lot of these, I see a lot of pushback coming locally, right? So remember, we don't invest nationally. We invest locally, we buy properties locally. Real estate is a local asset, right? One of the things like I find really interesting here is that, home ownership obviously it seems like we're more on the home ownership side versus the rental side. But then it leads me to think these sort of institutionalized sort of investment funds, these REITs, even I would say a lot of these larger sort of pension funds and so forth, they're putting their money a lot in rental stock. And I want to kind of show the difference here. And I'd like to hear your take on this, Marcel. But there's a lot of pushback locally to create rental markets local, right? Like there's a lot of pushback. You go to the committee of adjustment, there's huge like turnout from the community pushing back on these. And while they do have the ability to do so, and they probably have valid reasons, I want to say everyone in most cases are actually invested somewhat in rental, right? Probably through their pension funds. That's how their pensions are being paid, right? Is by these large investment funds going out and investing in the markets to the far right of this chart in rental stock, and then paying back these individuals on their when they retire, right? So you don't
Yeah.
like rental, but rental is funding your retirement. Why don't we do something? This is a different way to think about it, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, like, I mean, look at the reality is rental, multifamily, especially on the larger scale, have always been the real estate bonds, right? The bonds of real estate, right? If you want to put it that way, it's basically one of the safest investments you can possibly buy, in real estate, right? Construction and development being the most risky, and multifamily being the safest. And that's always been long-standing. And the simple, without breaking it down, the unit economics, the simple fact is, everyone needs a place to live, right? And that doesn't change whether when the economy changes, or when the weather changes, or when when Trump gets on his high horse, like it doesn't change, right? You still need a place to live, right? So,
That got
um,
me thinking, Marcel. This got me thinking. So essentially, NIMBYs are not YIMBYs, they're YIMBAs. They're like, yes, in my bank account, but no, not in my backyard, but in my bank account.
in my bank account, yeah, wow.
Yeah, that's funny, man. Like, honestly, this is the
Right?
reality, right?
That's a reality. That's a reality. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome.
So yeah, let's continue through. There's still a few things to unpack here. So this next slide talks about just kind of showing the purpose built rental building going strong, and that's in comparison to condo, right? So you can see purpose built rental
Wow.
really kind of diverging on condo, in around that late 2023 early 2024 mark. They've crossed paths, and that's kind of where the trajectory is going there. Next slide. Yeah, so this really shows the CMHC's kind of where their money is flowing. So this is the flow of money, right? So right now, as you can see, it's like insured in force. So homeowners, insurance that's going CMHC insurance that's going towards homeowners is trending downward, and you can see the rentals, trending upward. And once again, that same time period, kind of late 2024, late 23, early 24, kind of where that that divergence is happening. Right. So, once again, the capital flow is policy now, right? So, the reason a lot of this money is flowing to rental is quite simple. Rental projects are faster. They're faster to approve. They're denser to build. They can put more money out. Based on the work they're doing, more efficient to fund. They're in line with climate targets and urban intensification goals and affordability framework. So much easier. It's a much easier sell to put the money out versus the home ownership, right? So essentially, what we're witnessing is basically a recalibration of Canada's housing market.
Yeah, this is actually quite interesting. So this is where it is. We're starting to see a lot of policies come into play. So GST policies, development charges policies, provincial, federal policies coming into play to drive this type of product. And I even saw some articles where it is there's been a lot of shift from developers who have condo projects. I mean, outside of the ones that are going into receivership, right? They're actually shifting to kind of like converting those into rental. To your point, there's
Rental,
just a lot
yeah,
of incentives coming their way,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. But to your point also as well, and I know you love to dive into the different bills that are out there. I think what you're seeing with some of these bills is there's like a bit of a fight back, right?
Yeah, for
Where
sure, for sure.
some of these bills are trying to come out to promote the home ownership
Yeah.
in this market. And they're I would say it's a while away. They're teeing themselves up. It'll happen. We'll talk about the pendulum shortly,
Yeah.
but the pendulum is swung, right? You can see where the money's flowing. Um, CMHC does 88% of rental housing in Canada. I didn't know that stat. 88% of
Wow.
rental.
Wow.
It's massive, right? So this is getting larger and larger. So this slide here really talks about, this is for our developer colleagues and investors and those that are building, really showing the rental under construction as a share of total rental stock. So this is the oversupply story. So if you're, in BC, places like Alberta, maybe the Atlantic provinces, um, you know, the supply is getting up there, right? You really want to be cautious and almost kind of get like hyper local on where you're building to really understand that rental market, right? And we'll go into what's actually happening, because we're starting to see rental. Well, we know rental rates are coming down. Um, Ontario and Quebec still, looking. You always want to be like above and below the national, right? That's always like a safe comparison, right? So when you can see Canada there. When you sit below the national average, that's a really good place to be in statistics, right? So Can't Ontario, Quebec, at this point, looking strong. But let's go to the next slide and really bring home this fact, this point, right? So, this is kind of what is happening, right? So we talked about the pendulum. The pendulum is now swung to the left. Rental development is the thing. You want to be building. If you're a builder, if you're a developer, you want to be building as much multifamily as possible right now. The money is flowing for that product. What you want to be aware of are oversupply concerns, falling rents, and vacancy risks, with your product. And that's going to be subject to, where you are developing. So that's going to be, very, very local, a localized approach, and really understand those markets. Um, what is declining is home ownership, first time buyers, less subsidy. And the biggest concern for me is this equity and wealth creation decline, right? Because that's what comes with home ownership. That's, as you know, my MO, Ron, is I'm big on generational wealth, and generational wealth built using real estate, right? That's my whole MO. So those that are not in the market, that are not first time buyers, this is kind of what's the point here? The point is, really start to consider, if you can't get in, how these mortgage helpers, these multiplex additional units, be it basement or maybe it's a garden or whatever, really start to consider how those things may help you, kind of get that first step into the market, just so you're in the market. There's no better way to build long-term wealth than real estate. And, the developers that are building these rentals in this market, and holding for the long term, will reap massive benefits, from a wealth creation perspective, in 5 to 10 years, right? All while creating necessary housing that we need, so filling the gap. But it's those homeowners that I'm kind of concerned about, that are maybe missing an opportunity, to get themselves in the market by just thinking a little bit more creatively about how they might be able to make that first step.
Yeah, I really like this slide. This slide is actually such a good indication of how things are working. And to your point, like anyone everyone knows what a pendulum is. It's always in motion. It could be in various points within that swing, but it's always in motion, and it's never going to just get hung up on one end unless there's real, I guess, government is really incentivizing one aspect of the
Yeah.
pendulum, right? But
Intervention, or yeah,
intervention, exactly, that's the right
artificial
word there.
intervention. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and right now the intervention is really towards rental, because there's someone on different side of the spectrum that will say probably they should be building more homes and kind of reducing interest rates and bringing construction costs down. And there's others on the other side of the pendulum that say, like, look, not everybody's going to own a home. Rental market is actually important, as you can see on that other slide that you showed earlier on, where it is in some countries actually rental is actually the way most people are living. And I would suspect probably there is some correlation with regards to the age of the population, because in any country, in any city, generally the people that own homes are people that are established, they have been around, they have created their wealth already, and a lot of that wealth is tied up in their
Exactly.
homes,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I don't know if you saw this, Ron, but I read an article this week. The baby boomers will transfer, and we should unpack that. The baby boomers will transfer, the largest transfer of wealth in the history will happen between the baby boomers and Gen X in the next 10 years.
Jeez.
Trillions, in the trillions.
Yeah.
And the baby boomer generation, if you know, like, people like my parents, and that kind of generation was the generation of, like, slow and steady wins the race. They come here, they work hard, they get their foot in on one property, and that property is maybe derelict, it needs renovations, it's moldy, and they just work on that one property, steady Eddie, It's like the tortoise. It's like the
You thought
tortoise
I
and the
see it.
hare, right?
Yeah, that's right, that's right.
And lo and behold, 20 years later, 25 years later, that house is paid off and it's worth millions, depending on the neighborhood that you're in, right? So that was that generation. And that wealth will be transferred
Yeah.
to Gen X. I don't know if you're a Gen Xer, Ron,
Well,
or
yeah, I know. I'm kind of towing the line here.
not
Sometimes I
not
wonder.
not to name ages and all that, but there's a big transfer of wealth coming. So
No,
with that,
and I think that's really interesting, and it also it kind of makes me wonder: are the baby boomers really ready to let go, right, of real estate, particularly, right, and create and in an attempt to actually provide a solution for the future generation, not just X, but Y, Z, millennials, whatever you call them, right? Respectfully, right? Like there's way too much alphabets involved there. But here's one of my point though. My point is that our baby, because what we're seeing, and the idea is that basically baby boomers downsize, which is not happening at the rate that is necessary. They're not downsizing at any rate that's actually going to be able to provide the necessary housing for new people to get in. And I wonder if the houses, because when you drive out north and you see those houses, Marcel, those houses are way too big for someone that is now trying to think about starting a family. What are you going to do with a 4-bedroom mansion out north, right, where there's no transit, right? So I'm wondering if this stock that is being developed for this first-time home buyers is even practical, right? It's like somebody needs to scale those things back a bit, start providing us some more reasonable, stock that's actually even more affordable, like maybe not affordable, but attainable, right, and practical. So again, that's me going on probably about something that maybe doesn't even matter, right? But this is my
yeah, I'm not
sort
too
of
sure
thought,
what you
right?
mean by up north, but
When I say up north, what I'm talking about is on the outskirts of Toronto, suburbia, right? Like you can see, like north of the city, there's this larger sort of like
sure. I mean, there's more land,
there's
and that's
more
the
land,
market,
but the
right? Like
houses doesn't really match the actual the first time home buyer product. Like, I'm afraid to move into one of those mansions. It's like, how am I going to even maintain that thing? It's like it takes a week just to vacuum that house, right? It is so large.
there's look at it, everyone, it's household needs, it's the size of your family.
Yep.
Some people need, sometimes it's generational, sometimes you need 4 bedrooms, you may have grandma or Uncle Marcel moving in with you, right? Like
Uncle, no, not Uncle Marcel. No,
there's no space for me.
there's no space for you. You're gonna set up a kennel backyard, right? So,
A podcast room.
well, yeah, you know what? Maybe it becomes a thing of the future, right? Awesome,
So
man. This is
let's talk
good.
about this. Let's talk about this last article quickly. Um, kind of going into the supply whole aspect of it. So we looked at the numbers in that CMHC article, and this is the elevated supply that's starting to happen, right? So elevated supply continues to reduce advertised multifamily rental rents in major markets. According to CMHC. So there you have it. For the first quarter in 2025, advertised rents in Calgary, Toronto, and Vancouver, Halifax fell between 2 to 8% year over year. So there's your stat, right? Edmonton, Ottawa, Montreal, right? They're as per usual. It's game on there. Montreal just keeps coming up. That place, that's such a for those that are investing and building out Montreal. I think that's Ottawa as well. I think those are two real wins for the future, um, in my opinion. So yeah, so there you have it. Just to wrap up, we're starting to see that oversupply happen. You're starting to see rental rates come off a bit. Um, but this is all natural. This is all part of the market. This is the market taking a breather. There is nothing wrong with what's happening right now, in terms of the breather that is happening. The main thing we want to keep an eye on, I would say, is the population decline. We want to keep an eye on that. I know it's helping with jobs. There's less people, but this is something you want to keep an eye on, the population decline. And then obviously the things that are happening, tariff impacts and stuff that's happening to the south and overseas, global issues, are all kind of weathering this cloud of uncertainty kind of over us, and has people in a little bit of a fear mode right now for kind of reacting. So the old adage is, when people are fearful, you can be greedy, and now's the time to build. Now's the time to take advantage of opportunities. And then when people get the pendulum swings, right? People get greedy. Time to get out, right? Time to be fearful. So yeah, I mean, that's all we've got for today. I think we've unpacked some interesting stuff this week. Ron, take us home, man.
Yeah, awesome. Really, I appreciate you guys taking the time again to join us on Real Estate News Unpacked. I'm your co-host, Ronald, your 5-star multiplex designer, and I'm here with my main man, Marcel, your mortgage money guy and money lending expert. Guys, we really appreciate you guys taking the time. We look forward to creating more content. Please like and subscribe and leave us a comment. We're really happy to respond to those comments in the form of a video on our next episode. We'll see you guys soon.
Take care.